From awaytogarden.com and robinhoodradio.com, this is A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach, your weekly invitation to dig in and grow.
Summer. It's what I refer to as the season of dragging hoses. And for me, at least this year, the fact that it seems to have stopped raining with any regularity or measurable impact is making it worse. This is the season when we must all pay strict attention to watering, but how and how often, and what to give our attention to most and why. More on that in a moment with New York Botanical Garden instructor Daryl Beyers, author of The New Gardener's Handbook. But first, these messages.
Programming and underwriting support from Brushwood Nursery. For more than 20 years, Brushwood Nursery has shipped the finest selection of clematis and other vines all over the United States, with full gallon-sized plant and free shipping. Their website is full of beautiful pictures and information on growing clematis. BrushwoodNursery.com. Programming and underwriting support from Garden Tool Company. Garden Tool Company's wide selection of heirloom quality tools for your gardening passion is backed by outstanding customer service, fast shipping, and ongoing support. GardenToolCompany.com.
The popular course that Daryl Beyers teaches at NYBG is called Fundamentals of Gardening. And now Daryl, who has more than 25 years of professional landscaping experience besides his teaching role, has put all the fundamentals into the New Gardener's Handbook, which even this old gardener learned a lot from. I asked him to visit the show again to talk about watering. So welcome back, Daryl. How are you?
Hi, Margaret. I'm doing well. I'm a little bit dry, but I'd like to get wetter, hopefully someday. Yeah.
Yeah. Where's the rain?
Yeah.
You promised when you came on the show you'd tell me how to make it rain.
Well, my trick is to plant lots and lots of new plants and then say a little prayer, and hopefully it works out. Yeah.
Okay. So I loved in your book that you managed to somehow figure out how to quote Leonardo da Vinci in a garden book. Do you remember that quote?
Oh, I do remember that. Well,
water is the driver of nature, you said. You quoted him as saying.
Yes, it was in the introduction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Leonardo knew a little bit about everything, basically. So I think he actually knew something about watering in the garden as well. Because your garden will not grow without the proper amount of water, and it doesn't mean that it always needs a lot of water, but it does mean that it needs some water.
Well, what I loved in the book, there were so many factoids about watering to kind of make me think about it differently. Like you talk about, a 50-foot shade tree loses up to 60 gallons of water per hour. A healthy tomato plant will absorb and release at least 30 gallons of water throughout a growing season. I mean, things like that you start to visualize how important. Can you tell us about the different functions of how water is used by plants during times of growth?
Well, it's required for the metabolism, for pretty much all of their metabolisms, which is why, Leonardo had it right, where it's the driver of life. And so what I talk about is, several different aspects of it. First of all, cell expansion. In other words, for the cells to divide and to grow, water has to be present. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And also, water is the water that the roots are absorbing and bringing into the plant is conducting all the nutrients up in and around the plant and sort of distributing it throughout. So the vascular system is sort of flowing because water is available. This then in turn creates something called turgidity, which is basically the stiffness of the herbaceous parts of the plant. So your plant will stand up straight, the leaves won't wilt, and things like that. Water is also necessary for propagation, to get that seed to germinate, and even for propagation techniques like taking cuttings of plants, and even if you're trying to do like air layering on a stem or something like that. But even more importantly, plants will not photosynthesize without water, and photosynthesis is that engine that sort of fuels the plant, because through photosynthesis, the plant then is able to create carbohydrates, and water is one of the ingredients in that little chemical formula. It's CO2 plus H2O in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, and you get sugars and oxygen as the result. And so water is part of that formula to start with.
So when I began gardening, there was this conventional wisdom it probably folk wisdom or old wives' tale or whatever we want to call it. It was like in the Northeast, the garden needs an inch of water per week. And it was as if it was some formula. And you point out in the New Gardener's Handbook that the needs for water vary due to not only the stage of life the plant is at, but the weather too, like if it's really humid and so forth, and that thinking there's some formula can lead us astray, just like not watering can lead us astray. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, those rules of thumb can be helpful to kind of just sort of get you sort of thinking about it in the first place, but to garden with rules like an inch a week kind of a thing, or it doesn't really gardening doesn't really function like that. It's not as cut and dried. There's too many variables that sort of work into it. And one of the big pieces of the watering puzzle is to understand something called transpiration. Your plants, that's one of the metabolisms that plants have, is transpiration, which is another a little term that we like to use instead of transpiration is plant perspiration. In other words, your plants are sweating just like people sweat, and they have pores on the undersides of their leaves, and they're always releasing water vapor into the air whenever they are actively metabolizing, whenever they're photosynthesizing or growing or doing anything. They're always releasing that moisture, and they absorb all that moisture from the soil, and then they release it into the atmosphere, and they're continually cycling that through. And that rate of transpiration is affected by a lot of different things. Primarily, one of the big pieces is just the atmospheric and sort of environmental conditions that are taking place. So a very dry, windy, hot day, that plant loses a lot of moisture because it's releasing it out into the atmosphere. It's sweating really heavily. A more humid day or a cloudy day or a cooler day, it will release a little bit less moisture. And so the rate is always changing, which is why that rule of thumb doesn't always work, because you could have different weather conditions based upon, it just depends on what's going on. So like I take a look outside and I see like, okay, it's really humid. It's really warm, but it's not very sunny and it's not very windy. So I kind of got a good chance of like, my plants aren't going to be losing a lot of moisture today because it's just it almost equalizes with that humidity in the atmosphere. And so I can probably get away with not watering. Even though it's like really hot outside, they're not losing so much moisture like they would if it was really windy or if it was very dry. And so you have to play it, have to kind of play both sides of the court there and sort of think about what's going on outside.
So you encourage us in the book also to think about watering the garden, not watering the plants. Can you explain that philosophy to me?
Yeah, and I think this is it's almost a conceptual idea that then really will help a new gardener understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And so we talk a lot about like, well, I got to go and water my plants. And so it's important to understand that you're not really watering your plants, you're watering the garden. And when I say you're watering the garden, what I mean is you're watering the soil. All the water that your plants use for their metabolism, for their photosynthesis, for cell expansion, conducting nutrients, all this stuff, it absorbs that water from the soil through its root system. So you can spritz and spray your plants and sort of cool them off that way. They actually kind of like that sometimes. It's not a bad thing to do. But that's not moisture that they then absorb and use in their metabolisms. They don't really use that water in the same way. All the water that they use and need comes out of the dirt, comes out of the ground. And so ultimately what you need to do is you need to water the ground, and then the plant can absorb that moisture and use it for all of its functions. It also helps avoid overhead watering, where we get into fungus problems and other stuff like that. If you overhead water too much and actually just, you're sort of sprinkling right on the plant too much, that can become an issue too. But mostly you just need to charge the soil. You need to charge the soil with moisture to kind of get it present for the roots to absorb it later on.
And so then ... the more organic matter we have worked into our soil as good stewards of the soil and organic gardeners and so forth, like the more compost, the more humus that's in there, I would assume then that the soil is a better medium for collecting and then dispersing, so to speak. I'm using the wrong words, but imprecise words, but this moisture to those plant roots.
Exactly. So a plant root will not grow if there is no moisture present in the soil. So that's another piece of the puzzle, whereas if that soil is dry, the root itself cannot divide, the cells can't divide and grow into that dirt. So you're never going to get expanding roots. And if you remember what we talked about last time, we talked about balancing the roots and the shoots. So the stronger and more vigorous your roots are, the better, bigger and brighter and happier the top of the plant is going to be. So the soil needs to have some moisture in it for these roots to expand. And so what we're always trying to do as gardeners and stewards of the land is to make our soil better. It's the foundation upon which we grow our gardens. And adding organic matter improves our soil in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that it improves our soil is it increases the water holding ability of our soil. It improves our soil structure so then it can hold water better. In other words, it creates more air pockets for water then to sort of get into. And then it actually... the organic matter helps the water cling to the soil particles. It forms like a film around the soil particles. Makes your soil a little bit more like a sponge and less like, just a collection of marbles and sand and stuff like that. So that's what makes your soil sort of spongy and holding water. And so we talk about, there's something called field capacity, which is the amount of moisture that your soil can hold. And so you're always trying to improve your soil so it has a higher field capacity, which basically means that's the amount of water that your plants get to use. It could rain 10 inches, but if your soil can only hold a half an inch of that, it doesn't matter how much it rains. And so it could rain on Monday, and if you have a soil that doesn't hold water very well, then by Tuesday afternoon, you may need to water again. Whereas if you had soil, a nice, rich, organic soil that had good, what we call field capacity and moisture holding ability, you probably don't have to water till Friday. And then maybe by then it rains again, and then you didn't have to water again. So I'm always trying to get gardeners to build up their soil so it holds water well. And then they don't become reliant so much on the summer of dragging hoses, right? They don't have to drag as many hoses around, because maybe you get lucky and it rains in time before things dry out too much. And so you're always working on that, trying to make the soil hold more water. And then the thing is, it also gets complicated because then it depends on the plant as well, the plants that you're growing. That starts to kind of mix things up again. Gardening's never as simple as it sounds. There's always like an added wrinkle.
Should we give up now?
No.
Okay. All right.
Part of it, it's all fun. That's the whole idea.
I know. And I think I might have already made that decision many decades ago in my life here. She says, looking out the window at a couple of acres of plants.
Yeah.
So the other day, the plants, the 25-ish shrubs that were meant to come in April, that I ordered in the winter, that were meant to come in April for a project that I'm doing, which is kind of reclaiming the top of the upper hill of my property to not mow it anymore and add more native things and let it be wilder and so forth to increase diversity.
Awesome.
Those shrubs, all native things, youngish things, but nevertheless, a couple gallon size to 5 gallon size things, nursery pots. Well, they arrived because COVID-19 had shut down the nursery, the ability of the nursery to do landscaping jobs, to come and help, dig all those things in. And anyway, so ... here we are a couple of months late. No rain has happened in forever, it feels like. And it's on the very top of the hill where I don't have irrigation water. So anyway, so here I am. So I think I was reminded of your lesson in as the two guys from my favorite local nursery and I you call it mudding in the plants, and I call it puddling in, but yeah. So newly planted things, we need to really give them a good start. So quickly, can you tell me about that, like that process?
Yeah, and this is when we start to distinguish distinguish between how like a commercial landscaper might install another word, and
Yes.
how a gardener actually plants a plant.
Right.
So gardeners do it the right way. So I'm always trying to teach the gardener the right way to do it. In other words, we're not in a hurry. We're okay with, getting it done right and sort of taking our time and doing it the right way. We're not trying to, make a certain amount of money an hour. That's what a landscape company does. And so they won't do this technique. And the technique of mudding in or puddling in is basically you dig that hole for the plant, and then you take the plant out of the container or whatever however it was packaged when you received it, and you put it in the hole and you water the root ball right in the hole, and you actually fill that hole with water. I'll drag around a hose with a spray nozzle on the end, like a water breaker at the end, and I use one of those really light cloth hoses, so I'm not like wrecking all the stuff that I'm crawling around in, and I just fill that hole up. I turn it on and I fill that hole up with moisture. You just water, and then I start backfilling. And then I'll backfill a little bit, and then I hit it with water again to actually help that backfill settle down around the root zone.
Right.
And I kind of keep doing that. And basically what that means is you've completely saturated and got all that water around the root ball up to that field capacity thing that I was talking about. In other words, that the root zone of that plant has got plenty of good moisture in and around it and down deep. This is especially important if you're planting bigger plants, because the danger of the landscaper's technique is to plant the whole thing, plant it in the ground, stomp around the roots with their boots and compact.
A lot of stomping, not these people, but I've seen a lot of stomping.
A lot of stomping, and you're not even supposed to, don't stomp at all. And so, but they stomp around and then they water it, and then they kind of hit it for like 2-3 minutes, and they think that moisture is actually going to get down into the root ball.
It's not percolating at all.
Doesn't make it. It never gets down there. So this is your one chance. This is the thing. This is your chance. You have full access to the root zone of that plant. You're looking at it. It's almost like it's on the operating table and it's all open, and now's the time to do it, right? You want to do it once and do it right. And so you soak that puppy, and then you get it all nice and wet down there, and then you use the water to settle the soil, and then you've fully charged all the moisture around that, and then that can sometimes last you, a couple, at least first few days of the plant's life. It's got plenty of moisture around it, and then after that, you're going to get into the cycle of sort of, that establishment watering that we talked about.
Right. But so I think that's really important for people to know, especially if they are going to be summer planting anything, but at either end of the season, even in spring and fall, when it tends in the Northeast, where you and I both are, to be somewhat cooler and moister, nevertheless to follow that process. So,
exactly. Even in April, I'll do it, and so, but now it's getting like, you definitely have to do it now. Like I wouldn't, because July and August are tricky months to be planting for sure.
Well, you should have seen us.
Yeah.
Bucket Brigade.
And now you just have to hope that it'd be so great if it rained. I always try to, if you can do it, like if you can get away with it, I like to tell people to try to time their plantings with the weather, and like if it's going to rain that evening or the next day, try to get as many things in the ground as you can.
I totally agree. And this was something, an April project that couldn't happen legally until now, and they had all these other things. No nursery is on any schedule right now. It's a bit of craziness. I want to complain now about, for a few minutes, I want to complain about how bad most of the watering equipment that's available to consumers is, because I have wonderful hoses that I love, lightweight hoses that are drinking water safe and all that kind of things from a family out in the Pacific Northwest, Water Right. And they're great because they're light. And again, I have to drag hoses hundreds of feet, and, I'm one person, and so they work well for me. But everything else, I have to say, and I'm really disappointed in the junkiness of a lot of the watering equipment, and finding a good hose end sprayer. Not that I want to spray like I'm washing my car. I don't want to deal with a plant like that. But what you were talking about before with the breaker on the end, ones that last, that don't leak, sprinklers, a good quality sprinkler. I mean, it's tough to find what should I be looking for? What do you use sprinklers at all? Because I like to use an oscillating, you call it a fan type of sprinkler.
Yeah. I mean, they can be handy in spots. You have to be real careful that you're not that like none of that direct spray is hitting plants, because you can get some fungus problems and other stuff like that. But they can be really useful, especially if you're trying to establish maybe some lower growing stuff, or just to kind of keep a part of the garden a little bit more moist, maybe the early vegetable garden before there's too much foliage and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so, you just, the more durable, the better. And so, in other words, not the less plastic parts, the better off. And so I'm a big fan of, buying, paying a little bit more and buying the sturdier tool and the sturdier equipment, and then it lasts forever. So
I wish I could find it. I swear I keep wanting to say, where's the secret source for the really serious professional stuff, and I just feel like I'm not, because really it's not so good. I used to always use a lot of Gardena stuff years ago, and they were, they had models that I really loved, and most of those have been discontinued. It's just a lot of things have changed in manufacturing of everything, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of, because Gilmore is a big sort of irrigation company, right? And so, but you kind of have to, what you might have to do is sort of step it up a notch to the commercial grade stuff. It's kind of like a lot of
explore
things.
This good idea.
Yeah, so like if you want to buy equipment for your kitchen, like pots and pans and things like that, and so like the best score is if you can get yourself into a restaurant, supply company.
Yeah,
and you sort of do the same thing. So you could go to a landscape contracting company, like that sells a lot of that kind of the materials and things, irrigation sets and things like that.
Right.
And they're gonna have the more durable stuff. So I'll for example, even with other tools like shears and things like that.
Yes.
You spend $150, you don't spend $30, and then you buy it once and then you're done. So same kind of thing. So I'm always looking for metal parts.
Okay.
And
that's
durable.
A good tip.
So I want it to last much longer. I want to be buying a new one all the time. So that's kind of it. So I like to not, because as far as brands go, I mean, they all kind of have different lines. They have different levels and different lines. And so explore that.
In the last couple, 3 whatever minutes, I just wanted to ask you a quick question about drip irrigation. A friend helped me set up a setup in my raised vegetable beds a few years ago, and I've been using it. And how is there a rule of thumb on how often and what time of day, and put it on a timer and let it run for X or Y? Is there any kind of guidance on drip irrigation? Are you pro drip irrigation?
Drip irrigation is the one irrigation that I like. That's the one that I'm like all about.
Okay.
Spray heads, I despise spray heads. They just wreck your garden.
Yes.
Spray heads are for little patches of lawn.
Yes.
And rotor heads are for the golf course, right?
Yes.
And drip irrigation is for the gardener. And so
soil waters the soil.
Exactly, and that's why it's so good. It puts the water exactly where it's supposed to be, which is not all on the top of the plant on the leaves, but on the dirt around the root zone. And as far as like the duration of how much to run and how much water to put down, we like to talk about gardening long and deep, not short and sweet. In other words, I would rather have you watering long and deep, not short and sweet, which means I would rather have the irrigation turn on 2 or 3 times a week and run for an extended period of time, which you basically have to figure out based upon how big are the plants in there right now, what's your field, what's the soil like, and what's the sort of flow that's coming out of the drip hose. In other words, how many hoses do you have laid down? If you have fewer, you need to run it longer. If you have more, you can run it for a half an hour, say. So I have a bunch of drip hoses around some new cedar trees that I planted this spring, and I finally started needing to water it. And I can run it for about a half an hour. So you do a test. Your first run, you try it. Run it for 20 minutes. Go out there, put your finger into the dirt and see how far it seeped down. And then, and then make your changes based on that. But you're much better off running it long and deeply instead of 10 minutes every day. I'd rather
Yes.
have a half hour every 3 days.
Okay.
Because what's going to happen is the moisture is going to soak all the way throughout the soil, and then the roots are going to go looking for it. That's the trick to the whole thing.
Yeah.
The roots are going to go, where's that moisture? I want to find more. And if it's deep, then your roots
That's
are going to
better.
get bigger, and then your plants are going to get bigger. Yeah, it all works out.
Well, Daryl, I'm going to go out and drag some hoses. I got to hang up on you now.
Okay.
Anyway,
I'm just getting started. You gotta make these like an hour long.
I know, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever. Well, but I'm so appreciative of your help, Daryl Beyers, author of the New Gardener's Handbook and instructor of Fundamentals of Gardening at New York Botanical Garden, which you've been doing online as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
It's a Zoom thing. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So good. So we'll give people with the transcript all the links, and I'll talk to you again soon, I hope. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Happy gardening,
Okay.
everyone.
You too.
Programming and underwriting support from Garden Tool Company. Garden Tool Company's wide selection of heirloom quality tools for your gardening passion is backed by outstanding customer service, fast shipping, and ongoing support. GardenToolCompany.com. Programming and underwriting support from Brushwood Nursery. For more than 20 years, Brushwood Nursery has shipped the finest selection of clematis and other vines all over the United States with full gallon-sized plant and free shipping. Their website is full of beautiful pictures and information on growing clematis. BrushwoodNursery.com.
And thanks to all of you for listening. Now, don't miss an episode. You can subscribe free to the podcast version of the show on Stitcher or iTunes or Spotify, and you can find me anytime at awaytogarden.com or on Facebook or Instagram as @awaytogarden, and happy gardening and smart watering meantime.
A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach is a joint production of awaytogarden.com and the smallest NPR station in the nation, Robin Hood Radio.